Listen up, because this story will grip you. Go slower if you spill it. Could you even afford to pay? The shareholder's voice sliced through the hum of the gala, sharp and cold, as Olivia set a glass of wine on the table. Laughter rippled around her, the kind that stings because it assumes you're too small to matter. She was 24, a single mom, her plain black uniform hanging loose on her slim frame, her face bare of makeup, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The seven-star hotel in New York glittered around her, chandeliers dripping light, marble floors gleaming, every detail screaming wealth. The table held a multi-billion-dollar merger contract, and the room was packed with billionaires, lawyers, and shareholders, all buzzing with the kind of confidence that comes with power. Olivia was just the waitress, there to pour drinks and disappear. But when her eyes caught the contract, she froze. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't sign that." And in that moment, Richard Hargrove, the billionaire host, made a move that stunned the entire room into silence. Olivia didn't look like she belonged in that world. Her beauty was quiet, unpolished, soft brown eyes that didn't demand attention, a way of moving that was careful but sure. She'd been raised in one of the wealthiest families in the country, taught to carry herself with discipline and restraint. But you'd never know it. No designer clothes, no flashy jewelry, just a plain uniform and a tray. People looked at her and saw someone poor, someone out of place. They judged her for it, their words sharp and careless like they were swatting a fly. But Olivia wasn't invisible. She never was. And when they pushed too far, she'd respond. Not with a fight, but with a single line, calm and controlled, that stopped them cold. The gala was a sea of egos, each person trying to outshine the next. The shareholder who'd snapped at her, a man with slicked back hair and a Rolex that could have paid for her daughter's daycare for years, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Careful, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the table to hear. "You break a glass, you'll be washing dishes for a decade." The woman next to him, her red dress screaming money, her lips curled in a fake smile, added, "How ridiculous, a server lingering near a billionaire's table." Another voice, a man with a thin mustache and a nasal tone, chimed in. "She probably doesn't even know what a merger is." The table laughed, a cruel, practiced sound. Olivia kept pouring, her hands steady, her face blank. She didn't owe them an explanation. As Olivia moved to the next table, a young woman in a glittering gold gown leaned over to her friend, her voice carrying deliberately. "Look at her shoes," she said, her tone dripping with mock pity. "They're practically falling apart. Did she borrow them from the kitchen staff?" Her friend, a man with a manicured beard and a smug grin, chuckled. "Probably. I bet she's here to sneak some leftovers for dinner." The words landed like a slap, but Olivia didn't pause. She adjusted a napkin on the table, her movements precise, almost deliberate, as if she were anchoring herself against the wave of their cruelty. A few guests nearby turned to look, their eyes glinting with amusement, waiting for her to crack. She didn't. She just picked up an empty glass and moved on, her silence louder than their laughter. "Hey, if this is hitting you where it hurts, those moments when you've been looked down on, made to feel small, could you do me a favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It's how we keep these stories alive, connecting with folks who have felt the same sting." All right, let's keep going. The contract on the table was the center of the night. Billions of dollars, entire companies, all tied up in a few pages of fine print. Richard Hargrove sat at the head, his gray beard trimmed neat, his eyes unreadable. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Around him, the room hummed with anticipation. This merger was their golden ticket, a deal to cement their names in the history of wealth. Olivia was just supposed to keep the wine flowing, stay out of the way. But as she refilled a glass, her eyes flicked to the contract. Her breath caught. She saw it, a reverse takeover clause buried deep in the legalese. Her late father, Professor Daniel Carter, had drilled it into her years ago. "It's a trap," he'd said, his voice low and serious, sitting at his cluttered desk with her as a kid. "It looks harmless, but it'll gut a company in a month." Her father had been a legend in economics, the kind of man banks begged for advice. He died when Olivia was 16, leaving her and her mom with nothing but his books and a stack of handwritten notes. She'd read them all, every page, until the words felt like part of her. That's how she knew that Claus would strip Hargrove's empire to the bone in 30 days. She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, tray still in hand, and whispered to Hargrove, "Don't sign that." The room exploded in laughter like she'd tripped and spilled wine on purpose. The lawyer, a man with sharp glasses and a sharper tongue, leaned forward. "Who do you think you are, daring to stop a billionaire?" His voice dripped with disdain as the laughter swelled. A woman with diamond earrings the size of quarters leaned toward her companion, her voice loud enough to carry. "She must think she's in some fairy tale saving the day," she said, her laugh high and brittle. "What's next?" "She's going to tell us how to run the stock market." The man beside her, his cufflinks flashing under the chandelier, shook his head, pathetic. "She's just fishing for attention." Olivia's jaw tightened just for a second, but she kept moving, setting down another glass. The weight of their words pressed against her, but she didn't bend. She caught Hargrove's eye for a split second, and he hadn't laughed. He was watching her, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, like he was waiting for something. The businessman with the gold chain around his neck snorted, "This is grown-up business. Go do your serving job." The woman in the red dress laughed so loud it bounced off the walls. "She probably watches too many movies." The whispers grew, turning Olivia into a joke. Someone waved at the manager, a wiry guy with a nervous smile, to get her out of there. The manager hustled over, his face red, muttering, "Olivia, what are you doing? You're making a scene." She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on Hargrove, who was watching her now, his head tilted slightly, like he was seeing her for the first time. At a nearby table, a man in a pinstripe suit, his face flushed from too much whiskey, called out to Olivia as she passed, "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you stick to pouring drinks? Leave the big decisions to people who actually belong here." His table erupted in chuckles, and a woman with a sleek bob haircut added, "Honestly, it's embarrassing. She's acting like she's one of us." Olivia's fingers paused on a wine bottle, her knuckles whitening for a moment. She didn't respond, but she tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting the man's. "Do you always judge what you don't understand?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The table went quiet, the man's smirk faltering. She turned away, her movements smooth, like she hadn't just silenced a room full of egos. Olivia's hands tightened on the tray, but her voice stayed calm. She pointed at the contract, her finger steady. "Transfer of all parent company assets within 30 days. The laughter stopped. A shareholder with a thin mustache flipped through the pages, his finger shaking as he read. His face went pale. "Impossible," he muttered. Another man, older with a gravelly voice, leaned over, squinting at the text. The room buzzed with murmurs, the air shifting. They weren't laughing anymore. The lawyer pushed his glasses up his nose and scoffed. "Reading isn't understanding. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." His tone was like a teacher scolding a kid who'd spoken out of turn. As the murmurs grew, a woman in a silver gown, her voice syrupy with false kindness, leaned toward Olivia. "Honey, you're out of your depth. Why don't you let the professionals handle this?" She smiled, but her eyes were cold, like she was daring Olivia to step out of line again. Olivia didn't flinch. She set down her tray, her movements slow and deliberate, and looked at the woman. "If you're such a professional, why didn't you see it?" The question hung in the air, sharp and quiet, like a blade slipping through silk. The woman's smile froze, and the room's energy shifted again. a ripple of unease spreading as people exchanged glances. The opposing CEO, a man with a square jaw and eyes that didn't blink enough, jumped in. "Don't listen to some waitress making things up." He smirked, leaning back. "If she's so smart, why isn't she on Wall Street instead of wiping tables here?" The room laughed again, louder, like they'd found their confidence. Hargrove didn't laugh. He just kept looking at Olivia, his fingers resting on the contract. The manager grabbed her arm, not hard but enough to pull her back. "You're done here," he hissed. Olivia didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on the contract, then on Hargrove. In that moment, a server passing by bumped into Olivia, causing a single glass to tip on her tray. It didn't fall, but the clink was loud enough to draw eyes. A man with a loud tie and louder voice laughed. "See, can't even handle a tray right, and she's trying to play corporate lawyer." The room chuckled, but it was thinner now, less certain. Olivia steadied the glass with one hand, her face unreadable. She set the tray down on a side table and turned back to the contract, her voice cutting through the noise. "Page 47, line 12. Read it." Her words were soft, but they landed like a gavel. The shareholder with the thin mustache scrambled to find the page, his hands fumbling. The room held its breath. As the room grappled with her words, a woman with a pearl-studded clutch, her voice laced with venom, leaned toward her friend. "She's probably just parroting something she overheard." "No way a girl like that understands corporate law." Her friend, a man with a slicked-back ponytail, nodded. "Bet she's just trying to get a tip from Hargrove." Their laughter was sharp, meant to wound. Olivia's hand paused mid-motion as she adjusted a napkin, her fingers lingering on the cloth. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, but her shoulders squared, a subtle shift that said she'd heard every word. She walked to the next table, her steps measured, and refilled a glass with such precision it was like she was pouring defiance. The room's laughter faltered as if they sensed the tide turning. The tension was thick, like the air before a storm. Olivia reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, folded soft from years of handling. She set it on the table, right next to the contract. The room went quiet. It was her father's handwriting, neat, slanted, unmistakable. A formula, an example, a warning. Asterisk, never sign if you see clause XY asterisk. At the bottom was his signature. Asterisk, Professor Daniel Carter asterisk. A shareholder, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a pearl necklace, gasped, "My God, that's Professor Carter." She'd worked with him once on a deal that saved her firm from collapse. Her voice shook as she said it. The silence didn't last. A man in a gray suit, his voice sharp with impatience, barked, "Just coincidence. Who's to say she didn't forge it?" The shareholder with the thin mustache slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. We're wasting time because of a waitress." The room erupted in chaos, voices shouting over each other, some demanding to move forward, others whispering about the clause. Olivia stood there, her hands trembling just enough to notice, but her eyes stayed steady, locked on Hargrove. Then, from the corner of the room, a woman with a tight bun and a clipboard, Hargrove's assistant, stepped forward, her face pale. She'd been silent all night, but now she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw that clause too. She's right." The room turned to her, stunned, as if they'd forgotten she was even there. As the argument swirled, a man with a booming voice and a tailored tuxedo stood up, pointing at Olivia. "This is absurd. You're telling me we're halting a billion-dollar deal because of her?" His face was red, his finger jabbing the air. "She's nobody." Olivia didn't blink. She picked up her tray as if to resume her work, but her eyes met his. "Nobody saw what I did," she said, her voice low, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made the man sit down. The room's energy shifted again, the air crackling with doubt. Hargrove's assistant clutched her clipboard tighter, her knuckles white, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't find the courage. The room was splitting apart and Olivia stood at the center, unmoved. Hargrove sat still, his eyes closed like he was weighing the world. Then, without a word, he grabbed the contract and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was like a crack of thunder. He looked at Olivia, his voice low but clear. "If you hadn't warned me, I would have lost my entire empire." The room went dead silent. The lawyer's glasses slipped down his nose. The woman in the red dress stared at her plate. The opposing CEO's jaw tightened, his smirk gone. A few shareholders stormed out, their footsteps loud against the marble. They knew they'd lost everything. But the room wasn't done with Olivia. As she turned to leave, a man with a loud voice and a louder suit called after her, "You got lucky, kid. Don't think this makes you somebody." His words were meant to cut, to pull her back down. Olivia paused, her hand on the tray, and turned to face him. "Luck didn't write that note," she said, her voice quiet but firm, like a door closing. The man's face reddened, but he had no comeback. The room watched as she walked away, her steps steady, her head high. The whispers followed, but they were different now. Less cruel, more uncertain, like they were starting to see her. Olivia didn't move. She stood there, tray in hand, as the room processed what had just happened. The manager, hovering nearby, looked like he might pass out. He muttered something about getting back to work, but Olivia didn't budge. She wasn't done. The weight of what she'd done was sinking in, not just for her, but for everyone. They'd almost lost billions, and she'd stopped it. A waitress, a single mom who worked nights to buy diapers and pay rent. As she cleared a table, a woman in a navy blazer, her voice low and conspiratorial, leaned toward her friend. "I heard she's got some connection to Carter. Maybe she's not just a waitress." Her friend, a man with a slicked-back ponytail, raised an eyebrow. "What? Like she's his secret daughter or something?" They laughed, but it was nervous, like they were trying to convince themselves it was a joke. Olivia overheard, her hands pausing on a plate. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, but her fingers tightened just enough to show she'd heard. The room was starting to wonder, their glances lingering longer than before. After the gala, the mood shifted. Some guests tried to talk to Olivia, their voices fake nice, like they could erase their words. "That was impressive," one woman said, her smile tight as a drum. But behind her, others whispered. "Still just luck," a man muttered, loud enough for Olivia to hear. The shareholder with the thin mustache snickered. "Even with a billionaire's attention, she's still a waitress." The manager pulled her aside later, his voice low and sharp. "Next time, don't interfere with guests' business." Olivia nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she was looking past him, past the room, past the whole night. As Olivia stacked plates, a young woman in a sequin dress approached her, smile overly bright, like she was auditioning for a friend. "You know, you really surprised us all," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should take some classes, make something of yourself." Olivia set a plate down, her movements slow, deliberate. She looked at the woman, her eyes steady. "I'm already something," she said, her voice so calm it felt like a challenge. The woman's smile faltered and she backed away, muttering something about needing another drink. The other servers nearby exchanged glances, one of them suppressing a grin. Olivia went back to work, collecting glasses, wiping tables. The gala was winding down, the room emptying out, but something was different. The air felt heavier, like everyone knew the night had changed. Olivia moved quietly, her hands steady as she stacked plates. Every now and then, someone would glance at her, then look away fast, like they were afraid she'd see them. She didn't need to look. She knew what they were thinking. Then a young server, barely 19, approached her, his voice low. "I saw what you did," he said, his eyes wide with awe. "You're not like them." Olivia gave him a small nod, nothing more, but her lips curved just enough to show she appreciated it. Then the door opened. Richard Hargrove walked back in. He wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. He just walked straight to the table where Olivia was clearing glasses and pulled out a chair. "Sit," he said, his voice calm but firm, like he wasn't asking. Olivia hesitated, her hands pausing on a glass. She set it down and sat, her apron still tied around her waist. The room, what was left of it, went quiet. Hargrove looked around, his eyes hard but steady. "From this day forward, you are no longer a waitress. You are my financial advisor." The gasps were audible. The woman in the red dress dropped her fork. The lawyer who'd stayed to network froze mid-sentence. Hargrove kept going. "In a world full of greed, only those who stand for truth are worth trusting." Olivia's hands trembled in her lap, her eyes shining, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room understood. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She'd shifted the fate of billions. The next morning, as Olivia walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert. Billionaire merger halted by unknown waitress asterisk. Her name wasn't mentioned, but the story was already spreading. She glanced at the screen, then tucked her phone away, her face unreadable. A woman passing by on the sidewalk, her arms full of shopping bags, stopped and stared. "Hey, are you her?" she asked, her voice curious but kind. Olivia just smiled faintly and kept walking, her worn sneakers quiet against the pavement. The world was starting to notice, but she didn't need it to. The fallout came fast. The lawyer who'd sneered at her got an email the next morning, fired, no explanation. The businessman with the gold chain woke up to his name trending online, not for his wealth, but for his cruelty. Someone had recorded the gala, and the clip of him mocking Olivia spread like wildfire. The woman in the red dress lost her sponsorship with a luxury brand. They didn't want their name tied to someone who'd laughed at a single mom. It wasn't revenge. It was just the truth catching up, the scales balancing. As the news spread, Olivia's phone rang again. An unknown number. She answered, expecting a bill collector, but it was a reporter, her voice eager. "Is it true you stopped $1 billion deal? Who are you?" Olivia paused, her daughter's laughter echoing from the next room. She set the phone down without a word, her fingers brushing the edge of her apron, still folded on the counter. She didn't need to explain herself to the world. She'd done what she had to do. The reporter called back, but Olivia let it go to voicemail, her focus on the small hand reaching for her own. Olivia didn't go back to the hotel. Hargrove's team called her the next morning, offering a contract, a real one with a salary that made her blink twice. She sat at her kitchen table, her daughter asleep in the next room, and stared at the papers. Her father's old books were still on the shelf, their spines cracked from years of use. She ran her fingers over one, remembering the nights she'd sat at his desk, listening to him explain the world of money and power. She didn't cry. She just closed the book and signed the contract. Months later, she walked into a boardroom, this time in a plain gray blazer, no apron. The shareholder with the thin mustache was there, pitching a new deal. He stopped talking when she walked in. A younger guy stood up to offer her his chair. The room was different now, not because of her title, but because of her. She didn't say much, just listened, her hands folded on the table. When she did speak, everyone leaned in, their pens pausing, their eyes on her. Her husband arrived late to one of those meetings. James Carter was quiet like her, with a presence that filled the room without effort. He walked in, nodded to Olivia, and stood by the door. The room shifted. The shareholder with the mustache looked down at his notes. The younger guy fidgeted with his pen. Nobody said his name, but they knew James Carter, the man who'd built half the city's skyline. Olivia didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She just kept talking, her voice steady, her eyes clear. The people who'd mocked her never forgot that night. It stayed with them, in the jobs they lost, the deals that fell apart, the whispers that followed. Olivia didn't gloat. She didn't turn back to rub it in. She just kept moving forward, her daughter's hand in hers, her steps sure. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strength. It was proof. Years ago, when Olivia was 12, she'd sat in her father's study, a small room packed with books and papers. He'd been grading exams, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Live," he'd said, not looking up. "People will underestimate you. They'll see what they want to see. Let them. The truth always comes out." She'd nodded, not fully understanding but holding on to his words. Now, standing in that boardroom, she felt him there. In the way she carried herself, in the way she didn't need to shout to be heard. One evening, after a long day in the boardroom, Olivia stopped by her daughter's daycare. The teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, handed her a drawing, bright crayons, a messy heart with *mom* scrawled inside. Olivia's fingers lingered on the paper, her throat tightening. She tucked it into her bag next to her father's old notes and kissed her daughter's forehead. The teacher watched, smiling softly. "She talks about you all the time," she said. Olivia nodded, her eyes bright, and walked out into the evening, the weight of the day lifting just a little. The gala had been a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Olivia's life changed, but she didn't. She still wore plain clothes, still tied her hair back, still moved through the world with quiet grace. Her daughter, now 3, would run to her after daycare, her tiny hands grabbing Olivia's blazer. Those moments in their small apartment were what mattered. Not the boardrooms, not the contracts, not the billions, just the two of them, building a life. The shareholder with the thin mustache never spoke to her again. He'd lost too much, his reputation, his influence. The lawyer tried to pivot, taking a job at a smaller firm, but the clip of him sneering followed him everywhere. The woman in the red dress faded from the social scene, her invitations drying up. None of it was dramatic. It was just life doing what it does when the truth comes out. Olivia's new role wasn't easy. The boardrooms were just as cutthroat as the gala, maybe more. People watched her, waiting for her to slip, but she didn't. She studied, worked late, asked questions when she needed to. Hargrove trusted her, not because of her name or her father, but because of what she'd done that night. She'd seen what nobody else had. She'd spoken when it would have been easier to stay quiet. One day she found an old photo in a box, her father smiling, holding her as a baby. She paused, her fingers tracing his face. She didn't linger long. She tucked the photo back in the box and went to pick up her daughter. Life kept moving, and so did she. The world had tried to break her, but it hadn't. She'd stood her ground, not with anger but with truth. And that was enough. For those of you watching who have felt that sting, who have been pushed aside, judged, or silenced, you know what Olivia felt. You weren't wrong. You aren't alone. Keep going. Your truth is enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.